SBC Media.
Brazil, a global economic powerhouse, deeply passionate about sports, and now home to one of the hottest markets in gaming. And we're giving it the full SBC treatment. Join industry leaders, market experts, and all the major players in the country for 3 days of content, exhibition, and epic networking at the first ever SBC Summit Rio.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of iGaming Daily, where I am joined by Joe Streeter and Ted Orme-Claye, and I may have excluded their job titles because there's a specific reason why, and this episode is going to delve into that a little bit more. So, there's been a bit of a move around. I was off for a week, and then you all decided to just change job roles. So, we'll start with Joe. You've moved over to CasinoBeats.
Yeah, so I was with Insider. Started out as editor of Insider Sport, had a break from Insider Sport, picked that up again after a year or so. But for a long time, I was the editor of Payment Expert and worked within the payment space. A really strong team we built at Payment Expert, became a leading voice on payment and fintech news, blockchain and crypto as well, like a really good setup and a really integral part of what SBC does. And also huge credit to Callum and Victor as well on that team, who incredibly easy to work with, incredibly efficient, and really do a great job in getting the news and the insights out. And yeah, to give credit once again, credit to Craig and his team. Now I'm moving over to take Craig Davis's role on CasinoBeats and be the editor of CasinoBeats and SlotBeats. Something that's just vital, such a fascinating sector. I think I'm set up well for it. Coming from payments, business writing, there's a lot of crossover. And also when I started at SBC, I did work a little bit on CasinoBeats and on SBC as well. So that knowledge is, although it's been dormant for a couple of years, it is still there, and it's just tapping into it. And I think something that I can really benefit from is tapping into the knowledge that is already at SBC. Obviously, that goes without saying. I've been taking the reins at CasinoBeats for a week now and already learned so much from Danny and Connor on the team, who are both fantastic. Also, Craig is just a wealth of knowledge. He lived and breathed the sector for so long. There's not much that moves within the iGaming space that Craig doesn't know about. So that's brilliant to tap into. And then, of course, Chris Murphy, Andrew McCarron. There's lots of different voices, lots of different perspectives on iGaming, experienced heads about. And even... yourself, James, I
was waiting for me.
Yeah.
You reeled off this whole Oscar list.
I knew you'd be waiting. I wanted to keep him waiting. His fashion sense, he leaves a little to be desired, but he is certainly bang on when it comes.
Freak top right now.
He's bang on when it comes to the iGaming space.
From Back to the Future. Right, forget about Joe now, because he's an editor. He's moved to an editor role. But Ted, you've got a promotion. You were a senior journalist on SBC News. You've been promoted to an editor now, replacing Joe on Payment Expert and Insider Sport. Congratulations at first. Well done. Excited about it?
Yeah, so I started at SBC about 3 years ago. Back then, funnily enough, I was when I first joined, I was working on SBC News, Insider Sport and Payment Expert as well, kind of chipping in a bit on all three sites. And then, the more I spent here, I started sort of focusing a lot more on SBC News. That's been my main sort of project, I guess, for the bulk of the past 2 years, really. Working with Ted Orme-Claye and Jesse Sale, who've both been fantastic to work with. Kind of similar to what you were saying with Craig Jones, some of the other guys on our team, like Ted is obviously just a wealth of knowledge on a huge range of topics, as many of the iGaming Daily listeners will have picked up on every Monday. And Jesse's also just a fantastic person to work with every day. But yeah, obviously I've moved away from that team now taking over Joe's role as a Payment Expert in Insider Sport. I've been there about a week now, working with Callum and Victor, who run a really good team, run a really tight ship, really know a lot of their stuff, especially around the sort of crypto and blockchain sort of areas. Built up a lot of knowledge on that. So yeah, just finding it interesting getting back into the swing of things with payments, catching up on some of the trends that have been going on. Inside of sport as well, it's quite an interesting little site. There's a lot of knowledge I think I can bring to that from SBC, from the bookmaker side of things, to sort of like marketing, data rights, things like that, as well as with Payment Expert, because obviously payments is such an integral part of the betting process. So yeah, and it's been an interesting week to get into it as well, because we've had the UK's autumn budget get announced this week, and this future of payments review. So it's really been sort of jumping into the deep end in that sense from a content perspective.
Yeah, I think what the budget highlights, and something I was trying to get across to you, Ted, when you're talking to me about the role, is payments is not really a niche subject as much as it is. It's not niche. It very much affects day-to-day life of, as you mentioned, sports betting, but also it affects everything that happens in the world almost, and all the mainstream stories, all the big stories. There's a payments angle to these stories. It sometimes just needs to be found, and the autumn budget, how that affects payments is big. Whether it's AI development or whether it's fintech growth, whether it's crypto, there is a payments angle there, and it's so it's an exciting site to cover, because you get to sort of feed into those mainstream stories. And whilst we're on the budget as well, it's worth mentioning how it impacts the casino sector. And I think there were calls for the ban tax of casino rates to be increased to rise with inflation. They weren't. That was announced last March, but they weren't. They were frozen, and I think this was described as a stealth tax by the BGC on casinos. So yeah, interesting developments from the autumn budget, something that we're both looking to get our teeth into as it continues to progress, and as we progress into a probable general election as well, where we'll have to look and see how certain sectors are impacted by that.
And listeners can keep an eye out for any updates they have on the budgets and the articles that you produce for them on CasinoBeats, now run by Joe, and Payment Expert, run by Ted. We'll move away from the budget news. We can come back to it later if there's a bit of time, but I want to focus a bit more on news too. There's a reason we're doing this podcast, and the listeners may be aware that they're not set days, but we have the editors kind of run a specific day. And that's going to change, obviously, because Craig used to be the casino, now it's Joe, and then Ted, you used to be with, we call him Edward Memware on the podcast, because I can't keep trying to think of different nicknames to distinguish two Teds, which I'm happy now you're moving over, because I don't have to keep doing that. But it gives the listener a bit of clarity. Joe's the editor of CasinoBeats. I think he'll do a grand job with it. What enticed you about the casino side of things?
Yeah, so just to rewind on what you said a minute ago before I answer you there is, I think something that comes with having this pool of journalists, and Ted writing about payments now, and me having written about payments but now writing about casino, we don't just neglect that knowledge that we previously acquired in our roles at writing for SBC News or writing for Payment Expert, and that knowledge stays within SBC, and that really does help towards
like a cross-pollination of world's teams.
100%, and it really helps boost the podcast, because we've got all these different facets of knowledge that can be inputted, even if it's a conversation before the podcast that lead to a better discussion on the podcast. So yeah, exciting times for the iGaming Daily, I think, for sure. And in terms of the casino sector, it's such a fascinating sector. It's really cool. It's really interesting. I think you get that just from being at SBC events. You understand just how exciting and bustling the sector is. I enjoy it. It's the innovation within the space is fascinating. It's fascinating to see how different markets engage players. I love land-based casino as well. So how that sector continues to keep up with the growing digital space is also really interesting. And from having discussions with Danny this week too, the slot space is a wild one. It's, pardon the pun, it's a really interesting one.
It's a good pun.
It's still all right? And yeah, getting to write about that it's a real bonus for me. So Yeah.
I was going to ask you what you aim to achieve with each site, but the aim of each site is to produce high quality, engaging content. So it's a no-brainer to ask it. But what I'm going to ask actually is, you've been there for a week, you've already said you've been working with your teams, but what kind of trends or innovations have you seen or do you see emerging, and how are you preparing for them as you're tackling new topics and subjects here?
The UK autumn budget for basically deciding the government's financial policies for the foreseeable future. Well, should they... unless they lose the election.
In air quotes.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think what two of the ones that really sort of stand out, and one, I'll start with the first one because that was highlighted by the Chancellor yesterday in the budget, is AI. I know that's something we've talked about a lot. One of the things they talked about was how they want to keep on investing in fintech, and it's been quite a long-standing objective of this government. It's also been quite a big sort of personal project of Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, I think as well, to make the UK like a fintech hub, a big sort of leader for innovation in that area. And one of the things he mentioned, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, mentioned yesterday was investment in AI. This is obviously sort of a technology that's been catching a lot of attention in the betting space for a sort of a huge range of reasons, covering player protection, marketing, just design, product design, just everything. Everyone in every sector and throughout gaming and betting is looking at how they can use AI for something. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that's quite interesting. And also, there's been a lot of talk of open banking as well. That was something that was mentioned a lot in this Future of Payments review. And I think we're seeing a lot of bookmakers starting to look at how that can benefit them and make the customer journey sort of more seamless and quicker. And on top of that as well, I think it's also been looked at as one of the solutions for how the UK government is going to bring in these affordability checks, or finance risk checks, as they put it, which is one of the core outcomes of the Gambling Act review. So there's a lot of elements of payments that from the outset you might look at and think, how would that link to gambling? When you look at the finer details, they're very intertwined.
You've got a lot to sink your teeth into that, so it sounds pretty decent. And casino,
yeah. Well, you can tell from Ted's answer that he is completely immersed in the budget. He's been living and breathing the budget this week. He's even rumours have it he's walking around Manchester with a briefcase doing a Jeremy Hunt impression. He's all in on the budget. But what's been fascinating from a casino perspective is, and from an iGaming perspective, I should say, is different markets. I think that's really interesting. I think, getting to cover so many different markets that operate in so many different ways is fascinating. Also how player engagement varies in each market as well. I think in Germany, we've seen back and forth over the black market threat. We covered Vegas on the podcast earlier this week, which is just wild, just a crazy place. And also how they're evolving what they do is really interesting. And also covering the elements that sort of, I can bring my expertise from Payment Expert, and we can really specialize in those. Ted mentioned open banking. I think it's going to play a bigger role in affordability checks within iGaming in the coming year. There's been reports, on fraud detection this morning. Those are areas where I've really honed my expertise in the past 2 years on Payment Expert, and I can cover them well on CasinoBeats and learn lessons from Payment Expert bringing them into the coverage on CasinoBeats. And we can really specialize in such an important factor of the news and of the iGaming offering and side of things. Yeah,
I think one of the interesting things that you might encounter, because I'm not too aware of I know Payment Experts, but the what they do on it. The great thing about the casino side of things and the iGaming side is, and you'll get it with sports betting with SBC News, each market is different. Regulation, no market is the same. Yeah. So every time you've researched into a new market that's launching or some reworking of some regulations, if you look at Germany and how strict they are, compare them to another market off the top of my head, I don't know, Latvia. I don't know why that was in my head, but they're completely different markets. And I think that is what you'll really engage yourself with, in just how don't want to say the word engaging again it is, but just how interesting it is.
The variation, right?
Variation is a good way of saying it.
This feels like a podcast for forward thinking and also reflection. James, you've been doing the iGaming Daily for what feels like a long time now, but it's because it is daily. You've put a lot of rounds in the bank, so I guess you get to experience that variation just from doing the iGaming Daily, and whether it's with one of the UK-based editors or journalists, me, Ted, Craig, or whether it's Jess Wellman in the US with Charlie, or whether it's the LATAM team. You get a window into all those different markets. So I guess you've experienced firsthand just the variation and the multitude of different factors in each region when it comes to iGaming and sports betting.
Yeah, there's one of the interesting things, certainly when I was working on the slot side of things earlier on in my SBC career, is just, and I didn't really factor this in, a lot of regions have their own preferences and they have a safety bubble which they very rarely escape from. So when everyone talks about innovation in like gamification or game design or X, Y, and Z, well, the reality is profitability never really comes from it, because players are creatures of comfort. They like their own kind of, they like what they know. So the UK base, we're a fruit themed, like
old school,
old school country when it comes to like designs and games. And it's interesting to see what transpires within different countries. I know I've just made it into a niche with slots, but with iGaming it happens all the time, with online casino, with poker, with even bingo, and you could delve a bit into the lottery as well, but we have Lottery Daily as well on that site. You will have so many little micro elements to look at which you wouldn't have thought of, and it would just take you down an avenue. And it's kind of like, when you stay up at night, you just like scroll through like Reddit or YouTube or TikTok, and you go down a black hole of like just news. That's what you're going to be like on the casino side of things, and you are going to love it.
Yeah, there's so much to take in. And yeah, I wanted to ask you actually about your history with slots. Just after a week of sort of supporting Danny and looking on that website and going into that and trying to get a better understanding of what makes good slots and good markets and
maths make good slots.
Really?
It starts with maths. You get your maths right, you get your algorithms right, everything else will follow.
Wow, that's interesting.
So, yeah, that's one thing you should look into more, is the mathematics within slots, because not a lot of people do that. Future podcaster.
Yeah, for sure, future podcast. And also the character development of the slots and the story development is wild, all that goes into them, and that's something I'm really excited to tap into and to invest in and to have a look into and to develop further knowledge on that subject.
You'll get there, and it'll be sick. You're probably going to be there very, very soon. Like, you'll be good at it. But we'll talk about this more on future podcasts, because I'll be jumping on your iGaming Daily days whenever I want to. Whenever I can. I've got one more question, actually. And Joe, this is a question for you that I want you to answer for Ted. If that makes any sense. You've been an editor 3-4 years?
Yeah.
Something like that. You're a new editor, a week in the job. What advice would you give Lord Ted as an editor?
I think the advice I would have for you, especially being a sort of payments news editor, and you do this as a journalist anyway, but I've seen you do it. You're brilliant at it. Is just take your time with stuff. Think about it. Provide insight, and would you be interested to read this content? Does it stand out from the other sites that are covering it? How can you make it stand out? And I think we're sort of breaking the fourth wall here a bit, aren't we? But I think you're good at that anyway. Providing insight, providing a unique perspective on stories, and and such important stories as well on Payment Expert and Insider Sport. Some interesting stuff, and I think providing that unique insight is something that's vital. Something that you've learned from Ted Menmuir and that you have yourself you do it anyway. So but I think that's a good thing to think by, not just churning out content, but really putting out stuff that's articulate, insightful, and provides a unique perspective on the industry.
And one day, Ted, you may get to the point where you'll be talking to Nigel Farage on his GB News show. Right, we'll round that up there. It's been a little bit different to what we're used to, but I've enjoyed it. We've touched on some news topics, but it was good for the listeners just to get an idea of where you're both moving to, because they're going to hear your voices quite a bit. And if they just came in next week and like, whoa, where's Craig Davis? We want Craig Davis. Like, well, you're not getting him. Right? You're getting Joe Streeter. Or Ted won't be with Big Ted anymore. Oh, sorry, Edward Menway.
An East Midlands accent on the Payment Expert podcast is going to be a shock to the system, but I think it's a much needed one.
Perfect. Anyway, Joe, Ted, congratulations again on the new roles. And myself and the listeners look forward to hearing more from you from next week onwards. Well, thank you.
SVC Media.